Thank you all for attending the do's and don'ts of urban wildlife. My name is Lisa Klein, and I typically do twice a month evening webinars. And then we've just started to add in an additional one, maybe two times a month. It just depends on what kind of material I have. Lunch and learns as well for those of you that can't attend in the evening. Sometimes usually it's the guest hosts that we'll have during the lunch and learns. Maybe it's a specialist. Um, could just be some review material that I'd like to present on, every year because it's important that everybody gets a chance to see that. We have new folks joining us all the time, and I totally appreciate that. This is great if you're a master gardener for continuing education. This counts. Anything counts if it's extension produced and promoted. This is an extension program, so you can totally count that as continuing education. So if you're from another county, we love that you're here. Please spread the word to other folks that they can get their continuing education watching these webinars. I also record, as you probably heard me say, so these will be housed on our Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel. There'll be a QR code at the end of the presentation that will allow you to get to that, and I urge you to subscribe. There's all sorts of good content there. Pretty much everything gets recorded and put up there, so you never know what you might find. Some of them are super popular. My Happy Hydrangeas one has about 4,000 views, so somebody likes that. And so do the worms. They have a lot too, so that's great. But if you have any ideas for presentations that you would like to see, just drop me a note in the chat box. I'm happy to see about doing that. And if you have any questions as I'm going through the presentation, go ahead and put that in the chat box as well, and I'll get to that at the end. I am moderating myself, so I will try not to get too sidelined as I let people in if they're late to the game. But, forgive me if I take a second to try and figure out what I'm doing here since I'm doing tech and speaking at the same time. So this time we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of urban wildlife. And like I had mentioned, have several others. I have one on deer management. I do have another one on just generalized stuff about urban wildlife. This one I'll talk a little bit more and focus on um, what that actually constitutes and how we can kind of coexist with those animals that we have. We'll kind of break them down into different categories, so you'll learn a little bit more in depth about what we consider the categories of urban wildlife. And then we'll talk a little bit more about certain ones that are most predominant in our neighborhoods. Some you might be a little shocked at or didn't even know were around, but what you need to do to kind of live in harmony with them. And if you don't like them, what you need to do to kind of help move them along. That's something that we do all the time at Extension. We get a lot of phone calls from folks and emails. At certain times of the year saying, hey, I have a baby deer in my backyard. What do I do? Or I have armadillos. What do I do? Or, fill in the blank. We get all sorts of stuff like that. So we have to kind of run through some things and suggestions for folks to try and remedy that so that everybody can live in harmony. All right. So first of all, we kind of have to understand urban ecosystems. So a lot of these animals didn't used to be comfortable around humans. I remember my mom telling me that back when she was a kid, that her bus driver would actually stop when they would see white-tailed deer, that they were so rare at that time that it was unusual to see them, and the bus driver wanted to stop so everybody could see them. Now they're a nuisance. Um, you can't basically go outside without seeing something that's been chewed on from deer. You might see a ton of them hit on the side of the road at this time of year because it's the rut or the breeding season. Foxes, I mean, we had incidents here in my subdivision it was right before last, year before last, where we had a bunch of foxes and her kits. She was trying to feed her kits and eating neighborhood pets. And you can see the top left there, that's going to be the elk in Estes Park in Colorado. And that's a yearly phenomenon. They always come down in the wintertime when it gets cold. Um, you know, a lot of species actually thrive around humans, and some of them are more obvious than others. And, that's to be expected. We'll talk about those categories. But, we need to understand a little bit more about how they work with humans, how they interact with humans, and does that benefit their population or not? So, kind of the characteristics of successful urban wildlife. They're probably going to utilize human food sources like bird feeders, garbage that's left out, pet food that you put for your outdoor cat, or maybe you feed your dog outside. Gardens, let's not forget about gardens. We have a lot of people that get really irritated when the squirrels steal their tomatoes. You're feeding them. It's the same thing. Most of those animals are going to be omnivorous or generalists. So, omnivorous meaning they can eat anything. They are basically opportunists. They will grab whatever you have laying around. They love the garbage can. So, if you leave the lid off, hey, you might have just developed a new friendship with that trash panda raccoon, and then you have a problem. Many are going to be strong competitors, and they can often exclude native species, so they don't really care if there are humans there. They might skitter away when they see you, but sometimes they don't. I've had possums in my garage eating my cat's food. They don't care. We had one named Trash Ben because he liked to hang out in our recycling bin. Um, they have a higher tolerance for human disturbance. So they figured out how to coexist. They figured out how to live in that tiny, minuscule green strip or buffer between subdivisions. They figured out how to use wildlife throughways in the form of a power line right of way. So they've got a really high tolerance. They just don't care that the humans are there for the most part. And they can change their behavior and adapt. That's a big one. So I'll use deer as an example. So deer are typically going to be mostly diurnal, nocturnal. To hunt deer, you have to shoot them in daylight hours. You can't shoot them at night. That's called spotlighting. It's against the law. Deer will actually shift the hours that they're active based on human activity when they know they're getting shot at. So at the first part of the season, you're probably going to have better luck in hunting season than the last part because they've figured it out. Same thing with other animals too, squirrels in your attic, that kind of stuff. So we also need to kind of think about fragmented habitat. As Gwinnett County and a lot of these metro counties get built out, this is becoming a big issue. So cities are expanding. You get a lot in the suburbs. You get, farm fields that used to be gorgeous habitats with fields and woods and streams are now subdivisions. And they're cookie cutter. They're on quarter acre lots. You might have a tiny little stick tree in the front yard. It's not a lot of habitat. So those patches of woodland areas or buffers along a stream, those are getting fewer and far between. And so you end up with that fragmented habitat, and you get more isolated populations. Some can adapt and deal, some cannot. So you'll see more and more types of wildlife that aren't as adaptable pushed out into further, more remote or rural areas. You're going to have limited movement and connectivity in those corridors. We are seeing that more counties are starting to do parks that are more corridors, and that's actually beneficial to wildlife. So Gwinnett County has done some of that. They are actually trying to connect certain parks together, and that's actually benefiting wildlife by giving them that extra space to move. The Chattahoochee River, as it runs through Atlanta, that's a very good example of a connected wildlife corridor. So you have a lot of acreage around the river, and that acreage is perfect for wildlife to live in an urban environment. So you have a lot of wildlife that lives in downtown Atlanta. You wouldn't think so, but it's a perfect place for them. Genetic isolation is an issue. I have the albino squirrel there as a good example of that. So there are isolated populations of squirrels like this or other albino animals here and there, and typically in a more natural setting, you would not see them survive. There would be predation on them. But, and also you wouldn't see them as often. But in this case, this little dude is from a population in only Illinois. They're celebrated. And so there's actually quite a few of these little guys running around. You also have some piebald varieties. Those are the ones that are like partially albino, partially brown with the fox squirrel or the red squirrel. What? Sorry, fox squirrel. But those guys typically wouldn't survive in the wild because you'd have hawks and other birds of prey, other animals eating them. But they're protected in their little fragmented habitat. They know how to exploit humans. They're fairly protected there, and so they can breed. So that particular genetic trait continues to to perpetuate or in the environment, and it will continue to do that because that's something actually that's being selected for. Humans like them. You'll have increased human wildlife conflicts. So with deer, increased collisions, you're gonna have property damage. They may come in and eat your garden. You have more interactions with pets. You see that a lot with coyotes and coyote breeding season, where you might end up with, your little dog is no longer because got carried away by the coyotes for food or got into a fight or something like that. And then changes in behavior and adaptation. So this can include changes in diet, nesting habitat, activity patterns. Another interesting factoid in how they change their behavior. I used to work for Department of Natural Resources as a fisheries biologist. In one of the trout hatcheries up in Lake Burton, they raised trout there right off of Lake Burton, and they used to have blue herons that would come in and feed on the trout, the little fingerling trout. Well, they got wise to that. So they put hot wire up along the edges of the raceways, on the concrete raceways. And they turn the juice on during the day, which is when blue herons are typically active. They are not a nocturnal animal at all. And so it worked for a while. And then they would just turn the juice off at night because they're not nocturnal. Those birds figured that out. And so they changed their habits and they started coming at night to feed on the trout because they knew the electricity was off. They learned, they adapted. So these animals are smart and they figure it out. So there are some benefits, probably more so for the animals than for us. But we have to learn how to kind of live together. We can't just erase them off the earth. We don't want to do that. That would be sad if nothing else. But that can, having these interactions can help bring attention to conservation efforts in urban areas. So you might end up with more parks. You might end up with more pollinator habitat, that kind of thing. It brings attention to the pollution, like water pollution, stormwater. Next year, we're trying to kind of roll that out as a thing that we're going to talk about and do workshops on so people can be more aware of stormwaters in a suburban area or an urban area and why you don't want that. Adaptation support. So coexisting with humans, they learn how to adapt. We're providing more food for them and shelter that maybe wouldn't normally be there. So they're figuring it out. They're like, oh, hey, we like this. These strange things over here are helping us. This is great. Ecosystem services. So, I have a cold, so I apologize. They're going to provide some essential services like pollination. If we have, orchards, peach, pecan, or a variety of other things, gardens, home gardens, vegetables, flowers, that kind of stuff. They provide pest control, bats, in the evening with the mosquitoes, and soil health. You can actually have some manure and other things that will help with soil health. And that directly benefits human activities like farming and gardening. heritage, we all talk about the bison out west and how a lot of them got killed and we're down to barely any. So we kind of use those historical markers as things that we don't want to do anymore. Wildlife plays an important part in our lives as humans, and so we should be here to enjoy them, as should be here for future generations as well. Educational opportunities. Um, we've got like Dunwoody Nature Center, Chattahoochee Nature Center. There's a lot of opportunities out there for people to go out and experience nature. We've got the Environmental Heritage Center here in Gwinnett County. So there's a lot of opportunities to get out there and experience nature, experience wildlife, and understand it better and appreciate it. And then, of course, economic benefits, wildlife tourism, and eco-friendly planning. That can, be a beneficial thing for local economies. I will use manatees as an example there. So down in Florida, you have a lot of nice warm springs, freshwater springs, and you'll get a lot of manatees that hang out in those springs. Those manatees attract a lot of humans who want to see those manatees. So that's a good tourism boost for that economy down there, to go see those manatees. Diving for whitewater shark or for great white sharks. That's another example. There's all sorts of examples where people pay an awful lot of money to go and experience or be around these animals. Galapagos tortoises, that kind of thing. All right, classifications. So generally, they're going to be classified into 5 separate types or categories based on how they react to humans and their habitats. So some of these animals might thrive, and as we go through them, you'll be like, "Oh yeah, I completely understand that," and you'll see it because you've experienced all of these animals mostly from, most people have anyway. Until we get to the ones that classically avoid humans but like to skulk around the outer edges of them because they do get benefit. But we'll explain that. All right, so human obligates. These are basically domestic animals. You have your kitty cats and your puppy dogs and your farm animals. So these are going to be animals that are very domestic, that have basically had any of that wildness bred out of them. They now require humans to be able to survive for the most part. Now, we all know about feral cat colonies and that kind of thing, but generally speaking, these animals are going to need humans to survive for the most part. Um, they're not, so they're going to possibly compete with other native species. So we're all aware, cats and the songbirds, that can be a problem. They can also eat small rodents and things like that. So that's a positive if you got a barn cat, but there are some negatives there. So how those animals interact with one another, sometimes it's a positive thing, sometimes it's a negative. Human associates and exploiters. So these guys are going to be considered generalists or omnivorous. They can eat anything. Hence the trash panda in the upper right-hand corner. Yes, they're cute, but they're not called the trash panda without reason. So these are going to use human sources for food and shelter. And they're perfectly happy to live in and around humans. They don't want to shake your hand, they don't want to sit in your lap, but they are very happy to be in and around your house, your garden, your garage, anywhere. So they're going to eat pet food that you leave outside. They're going to eat your garbage. They're going to live in your house and live up in your attic and cause problems. These guys are going to be a lot higher often in population in urban areas and suburban areas than they actually are in their native habitats because there's more food available for them near humans than there is out in nature. So they do quite well as when they're hanging around us. Also, predation rates tend to be a lot lower around us than they are out in nature. So again, their population is going to be higher because there's more food, there's more habitat, and fewer predators to eat them. Um, so relationships here can be, I guess, what's the word? It's based on human perception. So technically, your songbirds and your birds that visit your backyard feeders are going to be in this category. They're going to exploit you. You're putting food out for them, you're putting water out for them. They're happy. You're happy because you get to add birds to your bird list. However, coyotes also can fall. Well, not so much coyotes, that'd be in the next category. Trash pandas, raccoons, possums can fall in here. Uh, those guys, not so much. They get into your trash, they pull it around. Mice get in your garage. They can get into your linens and chew stuff up and make a mess. Squirrels can nest in your attic, cause problems. You know, there's all sorts of issues here. And you may view them negatively, but they are in the same category as those precious songbirds that you like so much. There are issues with disease transmission and some property damage here. So, this is one of the categories where we get a lot of calls from, and we try to work through a lot of the issues that folks have about how to manage these. UGA does put out a list of wildlife, urban wildlife management companies for nuisance wildlife. So if you are having issues with any of these, feel free to reach out to us at Extension. We can put you in contact, give you the link so that you can find somebody who can come and take care of some of these with you if we can't help you. A lot of times, all it takes, especially for garden issues and lawn issues and outdoor issues where it's not affecting your actual house or anything like that, we can give you some recommendations that will help you get rid of some of these animals. If they're in your house, that one's a little tougher and you need a professional to handle that. So good, bad. Not sure why. If you are unmuted, please mute yourself. Please mute yourself. Okay, so the next category is going to be human adapters. So these animals are going to use human resources to help survive. It helps their populations, but they really aren't going to get like a super benefit from living with or around humans. They kind of skulk around the edges. So they're okay around humans, but they don't really like them. They're like a necessary evil, if you want to think of it that way. So these guys generally are not going to have a history of conflicts necessarily with humans, um, but they're there. So you might see that coyote running down the road. You might hear the bobcat. You might see the deer or have it bound across the road. You might smell the skunk, but generally they are not going to be waiting for you in your yard in the morning and go hi before you head off to work. So some other examples, black bears, robins, a lot of songbirds, red foxes, hawks, things like that. Human avoiders. These are animals that don't particularly care to be around humans and are more disturbed by them than not. It's almost a necessary evil if they do come in, and it's because they're usually stressed. Maybe they don't have any food, maybe they don't have water. They're looking for something. So they're not expected to be in urban areas, but you may occasionally see them either in times where food or water is scarce during breeding season, or during a migration, something like that. The elk in Estes Park would be a good example of during migration. Avoiders are often going to have a history of conflict with human. I mean, here in Georgia, technically we don't have mountain lions, but they do occasionally travel through and they're considered transient. We can all agree that if we saw one while we were out hiking, they're much more, you're much more possible. It's a possible interaction that you would actually have one out west. I saw one run across the road when I was in Washington State a few years ago. That was pretty cool. But out here, that's a lot less likely to happen. These guys typically need a lot of undisturbed area. They need very little in the way of human structures or interactions. Pileated woodpeckers are a good example of that. Owls, another good example. they have really large territories, and a lot of times they need big tracts of unbroken timber in order to survive and do well. And that's becoming less and less of a thing around here. I've lived in this particular house for over 20 years. And when I first moved here in Walton County, right on the Gwinnett County line, we had lots and lots of woods all around us. I heard pileated woodpeckers all the time, all the time. I heard owls all the time. I very rarely hear them now. I haven't heard a pileated woodpecker in probably 5 years. I hear owls. I heard some last year, but I don't hear them very often, and that's sad. Now, we don't have wolves out here, but out west you do. You're going to find them in larger areas like the parks and things like that. Foxes, they're going to skulk around the edges. We did have some here. They don't like humans, but sometimes, rodent populations tend to be higher around humans, and so they'll hang around just for lack of that habitat that they need. So they may have a higher mortality rate, and they often have lower reproductive rates when they're found around humans because sometimes they are eliminated, for lack of a better word. Okay, so the hurl model. This is what we use at Extension when we get a phone call. Hurl basically means habitat modification, and you're going to use these methods as a way from top to bottom: habitat modification, exclusion, removal or repellent, and finally, last but not least, lethal control. I've got a QR code there for resolving human nuisance wildlife conflicts from UGA Extension. You can check that out. Again, this will be posted at the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel. And you can check that out there later if you're interested. But habitat modification can usually be the easiest thing to do to get these animals to move on. So a lot of times, like I said, when we have animals that are hanging around the house, sometimes you'll get snakes in your garage. We get a lot of calls for those. What do? Don't kill it. It's just trying to live. You can make some simple changes at home to fix that. So you're basically going to alter the environment and make it less attractive for that particular animal to want to continue to hang around. So a lot of times with the snake in the garage, you're going to have dog food or bird seed or maybe Christmas decorations with wheats and other, floral things in there. Mice love those, and it's very easy for them to get in there. So they will go and exploit the heck out of that, and the snakes are looking for the food. So if you put all of that stuff in sealed bins that the mice can't get in or the squirrels can't get in, then the snakes don't have access to the food. So a lot of times they'll move away. Securing garbage bins, trimming vegetation to reduce hiding spots around the house. If you have a patio that's got hollow areas under it, a lot of times you'll get things that live underneath in those holes. Fill those in. No places for them to live. They'll move away. Rocks out in the yard, tall grass, tall brush. Get rid of that. That's a habitat for a lot of stuff. So if you get rid of that and move that away from the house, a lot of times they'll think those animals will move on. Exclusion. That's going to be things like physical barriers like fences or nets that you put up, maybe screens, and that's going to prevent wildlife from getting into certain areas. When you have a lot of deer, if you don't want to put a large fence like that one in the top left up, you can actually put cattle panels or fence around individual plants or in small squares. So you have basically like a cage over your raised bed. So the deer can't get in there. With the deer eating the bird feeder, right? Raise that thing up a little higher. They can only reach so high. So if it's up high enough, they can't reach it. And things like, see that poor little baby possum down there? When you got baby animals and mama kicks them out because she's got a new litter, whatever, they don't know how to find food yet. So they're going to go for the easiest thing that they can possibly do. And a lot of times that's you. That's you and the cat food that you left out on the back deck. That's you and the bird feeder. That's you in the trash can, or it's, Bambi, whatever. So make it harder for them to hang around. You want them to go out into nature and figure it out. And if you exclude those areas from where they are, don't feed the animals outside, feed them inside, they're more likely to move on and they're not a problem. Repellents, sometimes these work, sometimes they don't. A lot of times you have to reapply pretty regularly. It can be expensive. Um, I'll talk about those more in a second. And then last, lethal control. So here in Georgia, certain animals cannot be removed, trapped and removed from your property. They have to be eliminated, essentially. Some can be, there are some, but some of them cannot. So we really don't like to see any animals die. We'd like to see you try some other things first before you get to that. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, wildlife repellents. So I'm not going to go into all of these, but that's in the publication that was on the previous page. But you can see there are some here, and the different methods that they use are fear. So plant skid up there in the top left, it's a blood product, and the smell of blood can is put fear into some animals. So it's a good one for deer, rabbits, that kind of stuff. You do have to reapply it. So just kind of keep that in mind. Some of them can be kind of expensive. You got deer stopper down there at the bottom. That's a taste thing. It's supposedly it's made with a rotten egg product. Nasty. Um, so don't put it on edible plants, but if you have hydrangeas that they're eating or something like that, you can apply this. You do have to reapply, but especially if it rains, that kind of thing. But that's an option. You have Hinder up at the top right. That's going to be ammonia-based product. It's going to smell really bad. Smells a bit like urine and other stuff, and so that can repel them. They're not going to want to hang around that. Then you have down, it's a goose repellent. That's going to be taste. It's made out of methyl anthranilate, and it's made from Concord grapes, which is, natural, and it makes the grasses taste nasty. So if you have problems with geese coming up and grazing in your yard, you can spray this stuff down, and it may help deter them to go someplace else. And then you have Milorganite. Most gardeners are going to know about Milorganite. It's a little stinky because it's poo. Hence the little emoji down there. So that odor helps repel deer and other things because it's human poo. And so they don't necessarily want to be around human poo, so they move off. And it's also a good fertilizer. Okay, reducing human wildlife conflict. So these are some generalities, but for individual animals, we can kind of help you through that. So you're going to want to make sure you're sealing your entry points to your home. That's going to be roof vents, chimneys, pet doors, that kind of thing. You don't want unwanted animals coming in. We all see those funny commercials where you have the possum that's coming in and the person doesn't have glasses on and they're like, "Oh, here, kitty, kitty," or the raccoon that comes in. Yeah, you just want your dog or your cat in. You don't want the trash panda in. So securing trash and food, make sure you're using a proper trash can based on where you are. If you have a lot of problems with bears or raccoons that are breaking in, then you need a more secure trash can, or you need to keep it in your garage. Compost piles. Some of the community gardens were having problems with voles running out from their compost piles and eating their sweet potatoes last year when they were harvesting. So you have to kind of be smart. Move that compost pile away from where you're growing food. Make it harder for those little animals to get there so that they have to worry more about predators, aerial predators taking them out. You can use motion activated lights or sprinklers. A lot of animals don't like the harassment aspects of that. They'll move on. Make sure to keep your pets indoors at night. That will minimize some of those interactions. Goats, sheep, chickens, kind of a given. Make sure they're in a secured location, especially birds. You can have your whole flock decimated. We do get calls about that occasionally. I'm on a bunch of chicken pages. I see that regularly. They didn't secure their birds. something got in there and ate them all. You're going to remove attractants like outdoor waste, like in your trash can, barbecue. Um, Guilty here. We have a place up in Rabun County in the mountains where you have a lot more bears. Somebody that was staying at our place didn't clean the grill off very well, and the bear ripped it apart. So we had to get a new grill. And make sure to use non-spill bird feeders ones that they're either high enough or that squirrels can't get in. You have a baffle or something. Keep your cats indoors as much as possible, especially during migratory season when you have a lot of songbirds coming through. You might want to consider installing fencing around yards and gardens. One of my last deer management webinars talked about the different zones that you put your prized plants in. Have your prized plants closer to where you are up at the house, the less prized or more deer-proof plants further away where you don't have to put as much care into keeping the deer away. And be aware that there are some wildlife-borne diseases that you could have issues with regards to your pets. There's a lot of ticks out there. They can carry some bad stuff that deer can get and you can get and your dogs can get. So just be aware of that when it's in the area. Deterring wildlife from your garden. Again, just talking about a little bit about deer. You got to have a tall fence. Sometimes you can use that opaque fishing wire. It's a psychological thing. So deer are habitual and they don't like being put out. So we work with folks a lot of times on how do they do that? How do you mess with them enough that they just move on to your neighbor's house? Rodents, you're going to use hardware cloth, metal chicken wire, very fine, very small squares. Diggers, you're going to bury fence. Birds, you're going to use some type of netting. You don't want to leave uncovered sources of water. That can attract animals, especially in the hot summer months when you're going through a drought. And you're going to remove stacks of things. So if you've got a lot of underbrush where you cleared out that area in the backyard, or you've got some construction stuff, that's perfect for rodents and snakes and everything that likes to live in there. So you want to make sure that you keep everything cleaned. Animal repelling plants. We all love to think of botanicals and that they're the save all and the grace of, organics and all of that stuff. Not 100%. So if you know daffodils are somewhat toxic to consume, squirrels won't eat them. Be smart. You want to plant some other bulbs, plant the other bulbs, put some hardware cloth down, and then or chicken wire, and then put your daffodil bulbs on top. They won't go through the daffodil bulbs, so your other bulbs will survive. Garlic and onions, a little bit of a pungent odor, so sometimes that'll keep moles away if you plant those around. Lavender, essential oils. It can have a nice effect at keeping insects away from the garden if you interplant these in and around your vegetable plants. Purple coneflower, that can help deter mice and rats. It's more pungent also. Rosemary and sage, same thing. So the essential oils are what's kind of repelling the animals and the pests from hanging around. All right, let's jump into urban wildlife. So this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the ones that we get the most calls about. White-tailed deer. So we have them everywhere. They are all over the place. If you drive along in the morning or the evening when they're most active, you probably have them running across the road. I probably see dozens a week. And they're all over the place. You just can't, and some people have more problems in their neighborhoods than others. But deer have basically hardly any predators here in suburbia. Humans, which that would be hunters if you're in a more rural area, or cars. That's basically it. Coyotes, that's going to be mostly when they're younger and smaller, and you can have a pack of coyotes take them down. And dogs, because dogs will pack up occasionally and act like coyotes do to take down some smaller deer. But once that animal grows up to a mature size, they really don't have any predators. So deer are going to be most active at dawn and dusk and most visible to us during mating season, which is also called the rut. We get a lot of calls from folks that moved into a new subdivision and they show me pictures of the tree. And you've got bucks that are coming in, rubbing on these little seedlings and basically killing the tree. So they don't know what's going on. They're like, what happened? Well, it's a deer. And they're marking their territory. And you're better off putting hardware cloth around the trunk to prevent the deer from doing that. A lot of people just don't know that. They're surprised to hear they have deer in their subdivision. I'm like, oh yeah, they're probably living in your backyard. And then those same people might call me going, I have a baby deer in my yard. I need somebody to come get it. We're like, no, no, leave it there. Mom will come get it later. She leaves them alone during the day in a safe area. But the thing that I definitely want to hammer home, and you'll see it here and then on the next slide, do not feed the deer. Okay. If you have gardens and they're getting in there, you understand the frustration level of trying to keep them out. What is even more frustrating is when your neighbor is feeding them and they're reproducing at a much higher rate than they should be. Most deer in a native situation should only have one fawn, maybe in a bumper crop year where there's a lot of acorns, maybe two. But you routinely see does that are in suburbia having twins and triplets every single year. That is not normal. That's not normal. That's not supposed to happen. And what that means is what we call in wildlife management, that's above carrying capacity. So the earth, the area around here, can support a certain number of deer. That's called the carrying capacity. That's based on whatever grows here. There's enough food to support them. There's enough water. That's carrying capacity. And when you go above that, then you start running into issues. And that's typically what happens. You don't have any predation in suburbia. You have a lot of extra food sources around. You don't have predators. And so these deer are getting really fat. They have good condition. And so they're having more babies every single year. And then that leads to more car collisions. That leads to more property damage. And that leads to more calls to us. What do I do? What do I do to get rid of these deer? So first and foremost, don't feed them. They don't need any help. They really don't. You can see over here on the left, the carrying capacity, that deer population will crash. So what happens, and I always like to use Big Canoe up in the mountains, the North Georgia mountains, as an example. If you ever go up to Big Canoe or you know somebody up there, that place is overbrowsed to the max. You can't grow anything there because the deer will eat everything. Everything is picked clean. I mean, it is way overbrowsed. The deer are in horrible condition. They look horrible. They're skinny, they're malnourished, and they're more susceptible to diseases. We have, a lot of diseases that are starting to push into Georgia that we didn't previously have. And when you have deer that are in poor condition, that's what happens. They're more susceptible to getting sick, just like plants, just like trees, just like us. If you don't have good nutrition, you can get sick. So don't feed, but also know it is difficult to control them in suburbia. It's not completely impossible. You can do some bow hunting. Generally, can't do gun hunting in and around this area because you need such a large area to do that in. You can't shoot within, it's like 500 feet, I believe, or yards. I have to go back and look. It's been a few years, but you can't do that here. You have to have a large tract of land in order to do that. There's just too many people now. You can do some bow hunting. Again, that's usually there's people that don't want that. So that doesn't happen a lot because of that reason. But generally, don't feed the deer. Okay. So most people have problems with gardens. I get people all the time that ask me, what do I do? Well, it's usually a psychology kind of course in psychology here. Again, deer don't like to be harassed. They don't like it difficult. They just want it easy. They want to saunter into your yard and chew on your hostas and then move on to your neighbors. They don't want barriers. They don't want prickly bushes. They don't want fences. They don't want all of that stuff. They are smart and they will test things. I use a 12-foot posts in my back garden. For a long time, I just used fishing line, and then they figured out they could bite through that and just walk in. I now have a hot wire. So I leave the hot wire on all night long. Actually, I just leave it on all the time. I don't really have a problem back there, but they learn really quick. You get that hot wire, you put a little aluminum foil and some peanut butter on there to attract them in, and they come in and they lick that and they get zapped, and then they think twice about coming back. I even had some I can see where they went in and they had got to the point where they realized they could move the wire up and down and then walk through, and I have it positioned such that it's about chest height, and so some of the smaller deer did that and then it hit their back, and you could see where they reared back, and their hoof marks in the wood chips that are there. And I was like, yes, they figured it out. And now I didn't have any problems this last year because I finally had to electrify things. But you may have to go that route. It just depends on the pressure that you're getting on your garden. Repellents, there are some like you saw on that previous page, but they're expensive. Sometimes you can't use them on vegetables. They're only really suitable for ornamentals. So, there's that. And harassment, scare techniques, you want to try to do that before those habits are formed. So you can use, hang on, my cat's yelling. You can use, I call them the car sale tube men that you see that they flap and wave. But deer are smart and they will habituate. They'll get used to that. So you have to kind of rotate things. You can also use psychological stuff. They can't tell distance very well. So if you have a fence, a hard fence, hardware cloth or cattle panel, you can often use varying depths. So you put in a wire at one around the top of that, and then you offset it a little higher and space it a couple feet apart or a foot apart, and they can't tell the span of that. And so a lot of times they won't jump because they can't eyeball that. Sometimes you can just use fishing line, but it's a psychological fake out because they need to be able to tell they can jump over that to get to whatever is on the other side. So if you have too small of an area, maybe you plant some blueberry bushes, break it up a little bit. You can get creative, but there are ways that you can do things so that the deer can't quite figure out how to get in there. And we're here to help you plan that out if you want that. Other times people try to use nets, dart guns, fertility control, culling. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's debatable. It just depends on the situation. Rabbits, boomer bust populations here. Sometimes every 3 to 5 years, you'll see a whole bunch. Depends a little bit on if you have coyotes or foxes in the area. If you have a lot of those moving through because you have a wooded area, they'll tend to keep the populations down, but they can do a number on a lot of the new green growth in and around your gardens. Good news is that they're pretty easy to exclude. They're herbivores, so they're just wanting that new lush growth. They'll get in there and you can usually tell. You see those little droppings around. It's pretty easy to tell when they're there. But dig down you can see the chicken fencing there. It needs to be about 2 feet tall. It'll help keep turtles out as well. And you need something they can't chew through. So something that's metal. And that's going to prevent them from getting through and under or over. So if you have a lot of problems with rabbits, this is a good one. You can also use those motion activated sprinklers to harass them. Some of those repellent products, again, you have to reapply them a lot. They can be expensive. If money's not an object, you can try it. Sometimes people have dogs or cats that they also use to kind of harass them and get them to stay away. But in this case, exclusion is usually the easiest thing that you can do. Just keep them out, prevent them from getting in. Squirrels, these are everywhere. Tree rats, tree maggots. I mean, they've got all sorts of different names. Some people love them and they feed them. Some people hate them because they eat the bird food that they put out. Love them or hate them, they're here. There's tons of them. Sometimes they're prey for foxes and coyotes if they're passing through. It's native, they're native to this area. You can't really do much about getting rid of them. There are flying squirrels also here. You don't see them as often. They're nocturnal. And chipmunks and prairie dogs. We don't have the prairie dogs here, but they're just everywhere. They're cute. I just kind of let them be. They're very social and they're mostly herbivores, but they can do a lot of damage. Don't mistake that. They will chew into your attic because it's a nice safe space and they'll live in your insulation. And you can actually hear them. They sometimes will be nocturnal up there. So in that case, you have to be kind of careful because they can have a lot of babies. There's some damage that you see up at the top right. That's what you do when you do something called excluding. So in the case where you have a lot of problems with squirrels, you're going to have to figure out where they're entering. And this is where those nuisance wildlife companies come in. It's expensive, but they figure out where they're getting in and then they put some type of an exclusion barrier up like this. You can see they tried hardware cloth in there and then they finally put something that was a little bit more substantial. The easiest way to keep them from doing that, if you've got overhanging tree branches like you see there, cut them back at least 6 to 8 feet away from your house. That way they can't jump onto the house and then hang onto your gutters and chew in. You can also see the down there on the bottom left, they've crawled in up there through that area. Bats can get in there too. You have to be real careful about keeping hardware cloth on the back side of that. It's not a well-maintained area on most people's houses for ventilation, so that's where they get in. They can get into your bird feeders, use a squirrel baffle, pretty easy. I had a call about somebody with them getting into the tomatoes. This is kind of what you got to do. If it's a big problem and you don't want to share, you're going to have to be a little bit more creative, unfortunately, and you're going to have to cover stuff up. The good news is that you can buy capsaicin products to spray. You have to put it on after every rain, but it works at keeping them away, helping to deter them from getting into the bird food or going back to an area that they've been in again and again. Raccoons, these trash pandas, they're cute, but nobody really wants them because they can carry disease and they make a mess. So these guys are nocturnal, you know, kind of like about the size of a medium dog. Um, they have about 3 to 5 young per year, so they don't breed excessively, but they'll eat anything. That's why they're called trash pandas. They're very cute to watch. Better have them in a zoo or out a ways, but everybody has them. I mean, we have a Ring doorbell. I can't tell you how many times I saw. At first, it was the quads, then it was the triplets, and then it was the twins because they kept getting picked off. But they would come up on my porch and walk around, and then you could follow them around the back, and the light would pop off, floodlight would pop on, and they'd go under my deck. Very cute. But they also get into the chicken food and other things. So they are also a large host of rabies in the US. So a good reservoir is what we call it. So just beware if you see them during the daytime, especially an adult, that's not good. You might want to report that, especially if it's acting strangely, because it may be a rabies case. Control, they can get into trash cans. They're not as much of a nuisance as bears. This is a bear-proof trash can, but if you just want to, go all the way and you don't have to worry about it, this one will keep you safe. Trapping is very effective, but know that this is one of the animals that lethal control is what happens if you trap them. So if you pay for a wildlife company to come out, they're going to kill them afterwards. And, you know, can you live with it? I don't know. You have to see. But they can be frightened away with noise or water, so you can use a motion activated sprinkler. But they're smart, so you have to kind of rotate what you're doing to keep them away. Possums. So possums, there's not a lot of controls for these guys because they're kind of a little bit annoying. They'll get into your garage, eat your pet food. Your cat might not like it. They like to hang out and sleep in your garage, but they're not really going to do anything. Um, you know, They're immune to most snake venoms, which is kind of interesting, a little factoid there. They will hiss, they will play dead. Remember Trash Ben? You'd kind of fall on his side, play possum. But generally, they're not going to bite you unless you stick your hand in their mouth. As babies, again, when mama kicks them off, they don't know where to go. So that's when you're most likely to see a young possum is when they're trying to figure it out. So you could have a little grace, put the pet food away, just deter them, say, okay, time to move on. No need to eliminate them. They'll kind of go off and do their own thing. Shut the doors, close the garages, put the pet food away. Canada geese, these guys are annoying. Um, Long story short, I'm going to try to speed it up because I'm running out of time. They are native to this area. However, their population started to decrease. We're not in a flyway here in Georgia. The nearest major flyway would be out in Mississippi. There's another one up in Tennessee. So the population started to drop in like the 70s and 80s. Georgia DNR decided they were going to restock Canada geese. So they did not take geese that were native to this area. Okay, that's very important because they got geese from other locations. And those geese were like, hey, this is great. We like this. It's warm here. There's lots of food. You got water and habitat. We don't need to leave. And that's what happened. That's why you have them all over the place. So, they have all sorts of nicknames. Yard maggots would be one of them. When I worked with DNR, we had to deal with these a lot. And they go through molts where they can't fly. And then we would go out and tag them and try to figure out population, that kind of thing. They can be a real pain when you're trying to go for a walk around the park and they're out there and they've pooped everywhere. Yeah, they can be a big mess. So there's all sorts of firearm restrictions because they're technically a migratory bird, even though these birds don't migrate. You can get nuisance permits outside of that, but a lot of times if you live on a golf course or with a pond or something, sometimes people will hire border collies. There are people that have border collies that come out and harass them for several weeks, and then the birds will fly off and go someplace else, and then you're fine for a while. So we can help with solutions for how to keep them off your property if you live around a pond. They do tend to mate for life, and they'll, have anywhere from 1 to 15 eggs per year. Survival is relative. It kind of depends on how protected they are. So sometimes the more insulated and isolated they are, they'll have a lot of babies. Control, don't feed them. I know it's fun to do that at the park, but please don't because that just increases the carrying capacity and they can have, please don't do it. Most people, I know it's fun, but if you can help yourself, just let them be. Harassment, again, use trained dogs, noisemakers, things like that. Get them to move. They don't like that. If you're in an area where you can hunt them during migratory waterfowl season. Um, Basically, you just want to get them out of there before they start any habits. And you want to try to reduce their reproductive rates. So if you're on a pond and you got some big bass in there, they'll probably do it for you. Otherwise, there are people that will apply for permits to go out and destroy the eggs in the nest. I know that sounds horrible, but we've got a lot too many sometimes, and they make a lot of mess. And so, sometimes it's better to take care of it then than have to deal with it later. Moles and voles, real quick. Differences between these guys. You can see there the mole, kind of an ugly little face, looks a lot more like that shrew. And then voles, they have a little tail. Moles are subterranean. Voles live on the surface. Moles are omnivorous. They'll eat grubs and insects and worms, or carnivorous. And voles are not. They are vegetarians, but they'll do a number on the roots of your plants. They typically live in meadows, grasslands, fields, and they're kind of cute. You might kind of cross them with a field mouse. Mice tend to have bigger ears, and the short-tailed shrew, which we have in the area, it looks a little bit like a mole. but they are above the ground. So we'll get calls about these folks. So if you see those hills in your yard and then there's kind of a track going around, that's going to be your mole. If you have your hosta roots eaten, that's your vole with a V. Control, a lot of times it just ends up being lethal. So there's some traps that you can use. Voles, we try to deter them. Don't put your mulch up around the trunks of your trees and your plants and things like that because they will use that as cover to get up there. The voles were what were causing the problems in one of the community gardens and eating all the sweet potatoes. So you can also try use sprinkling castor oil around some types of repellent plants, although capsaicin-based pesticides, removing brush around there. Make it so that they have to go through the gauntlet and they have to worry about aerial predators. That's probably the biggest thing. And for moles, treat for grubs. If you treat for grubs at the proper time, you'll have a better looking lawn, but you'll remove their food source. All right. Armadillos, these guys have slowly moved up from Mexico. They will dig in your yard and cause a lot of trauma to your grass. We get calls. It cost me $300 to remove one armadillo and it came back. It's because you got a food source there. Again, we can help you figure out why they're there and come up with cheaper ways of getting rid of them. Because if you don't take care of the food source, if you don't get rid of the habitat, they will come back. So we can help you work through the psychology of what they need and help them move along naturally so they're somebody else's problem. So the signs, you get these little 3 by 5 inch holes, trashing your lawn. They're looking for grubs, worms, mushrooms, fruits. They're omnivores. They'll eat anything. And when they're frightened, they jump straight up. I've got a story where my husband was taking my daughter to high school one time back when she was in high school, and they walked out and they got into the car, and I had a pile of wood chips out there in front of the car, and they flipped the lights on, and there were a couple of armadillos that were a little amorous, and when they flipped the lights on, it scared them, and they both jumped straight up and then bolted off into the woods. It's the funniest thing she said she'd ever seen. Anyway. But they're a presumed vector of leprosy. Most people have probably heard that, but I don't know too many people that are going to go out there and play with them. But just kind of keep that in the back of your head. And you can usually control them by ridding your lawn of grubs. So you can do a grub treatment to get rid of those, and then they will tend to move on. Sometimes you have problems after heavy rains because the earthworms will move up, but generally it's the grubs they're after. Beavers, this is one where you can relocate it, so you can hire a company to come out and relocate. Um, it can cause a lot of destruction if they create that dam and dam something up, and that water can then cause problems. So I do recommend if you have a beaver issue, you probably want to hire a professional to come take care of that. If you have an existing lake and they're taking down trees around the edge, you can easily, fix that by putting some hardware cloth around the trees like you see at the bottom there. That'll deter, they can't get in there and gnaw through those, and so they'll be safer. Sometimes they move on their own, but generally speaking, the way that people get rid of them is to trap them. So you would need to have a professional to do that. Coyotes, we all know about those. They're transient, they move through. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. They live in a pack. You can hear them sometimes. Mostly nocturnal to avoid humans, but occasionally during mating season, you'll see them out in the early morning. That's when they're very deadly to us and to our small pets. So they're very agitated at that time in the spring. So you want to be careful about when you're taking your dogs out or when you let your cats out. Make sure if you take your dogs out, they're on a leash. Don't just let your little dogs out. And don't think that if you have a chain link fence or even a 6 foot privacy fence that you're safe. You're not. They can dig and they can jump. So you have to be real careful at that time. As I said, make sure you take your animals out on a leash. I would not let my cats out at night because that's when they tend to be out. Make sure they're in. Remove attractants, get rid of pet foods and other things that might attract their prey. Not for them, but for their prey, and trim shrubbery so that there's no place that they can hide. Harassment works. So if you see them around, you can start harassing them, and that will sometimes help them to get to move on. And you might need to bring a trapper in. Black bears, I believe this is the last slide. Thanks for hanging me. I'm running a little late, but you're probably wondering why in the world are black bears on here? Well, yeah, we have those in Atlanta, usually in the spring and into early summer, even in Gwinnett County. So these guys are native. Mostly you'll find them up in North Georgia. You might find some in South Georgia. They're pretty big. They don't really care for people. They're one of those that kind of hang on the periphery. When you see them here, it's usually in the spring after the mother has pushed the young cub from the last year out because she's got new babies. And so those immature, stupid babies don't know what they're doing, and they're going to where the food source is easy. So that's going to be your trash, that's going to be your cat food or pet food, your bird seed, that kind of stuff. They will move down from the mountains. We get them every year. I followed one on next door in North Gwinnett County all the way down into the Harbins area. People would see him. He'd pop up all along 316. And then after 2 or 3 weeks, he kind of went away. When they become a nuisance, DNR will get involved. Otherwise, I just tell people just leave them be, bring all of that stuff in, make sure your trash is secured. Don't leave that stuff out. Let them go. They'll move on their own. But they will use and forage in urban areas. They're not too scared of humans. So just be aware of that. And here's the map. You can kind of see. Here's Gwinnett County. There's an awful lot of sightings in the northern Atlanta metro area. There are. I mean, you can see right there. These are confirmed bear sightings. If you want to look at the map yourself, you can use that QR code. It'll take you there. This picture is actually in a Gwinnett County neighborhood. There are a lot of them here in the spring. So just be aware. I say be bear aware. If you want to learn more about their habits, you can go to that Bearwise website down there. You'll learn all sorts of interesting information about them. They are fascinating creatures. That's a bear-proof trash can. They're very expensive, but they'll also keep the raccoons out. And then you can also go to Georgia DNR. They don't rotten eggs. They like that kind of stuff. They like rotten meat. So fallen fruit, if you have a fruit tree, pet food, that kind of stuff, make sure it's up and away, especially in June, May, June. That's when you'll see them around here. And make sure that your garbage cans are secured, and your grills. Remember my grill story. And finally, last but not least, how to protect and respect, preserve those natural habitats, reduce that waste, dispose of trash properly. Don't disturb them if you see them. Supporting conservation organizations to donate or volunteer if you can. Try to use sustainable products and educate others. Participate in cleanup events if you can to keep places clean and habitats free of invasives and trash. Create wildlife friendly spaces in your own yard, not for bears, unless you live up in the mountains. Be mindful of your pets. Make sure they're supervised during correct times, and follow the guidelines in protected areas if you're out hiking or enjoying nature so that you're not doing anything to help them. So this is if you want more classes and events, you can see that QR code on the left above that little squirrel. That'll take you there and you can sign up. If you found us on the main extension website, if you're finding out about us through clips, you can also go here if you don't want to wait for the clips newsletter. And then if you want to watch some of the old recorded programs, you can go to our YouTube Metro Master Gardener channel. That'll take you there and you can subscribe. If you have any questions for me, you can check out, send me a question there at my email, either at the Gwinnett County or the UGA email, either one of those. And that's basically it. So if anybody has any questions, you can drop them in the chat box. Oops. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Jump out of here. Does anybody have any questions about specific things to have to do with wildlife and keeping wildlife out of your property and doing damage or anything like that? It's very quiet. I guess. Okay. Um, well, if you don't have any other questions, then this has been recorded. So I usually tell folks, give me about a week. It's been kind of busy, so I did let some of the other ones pile up from last time, but those are all available online right now. So you should be able to get everything up to this one on our YouTube channel. And this one will probably be up there, I would say, probably next week. I'll put that up. So if you have any specific questions about a situation with your own house, feel free to email me, give us a call, excuse me, and I will do my best to try to help you. So with that, I will go ahead and end it. Thank you all for attending. I appreciate it. Have a good evening.